Welcome, everyone. We'll wait just a couple seconds to let everyone join, and then we'll begin. Okay, looks like we can go ahead and start. Welcome to the Healthcare Lounge. Today's topic is the sins of the BUCAHs with special guest Wendell Potter. So now I will turn it over to Nelson.
Wendell, thank you. Welcome to this episode of the Healthcare Lounge. I have a very special, fantastic guest with me today, and you are in for a treat if you're ready for the truth. Of course, Jack Nicholson famously said in one of his many characters, "You can't handle the truth." But I think you can handle the truth, and there's no one better to provide the truth about our industry, particularly the 800-pound gorillas in our industry, which are the health carriers, the health insurance companies, the BUCAHs, Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetna, and for at least a little while longer, Humana. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Wendell Potter. The title of today's Healthcare Lounge is The Sins of the BUCAHs. And no one ever in the history of our industry has been in a higher position with more access to the operations and the strategies and the business objectives of the BUCAHs than my guest today. So what I'd like to do is bring him on. Wendell, great to have you here in the Healthcare Lounge.
Nelson, thanks so much. It's great to be in the lounge with you. Appreciate it very much.
What I'd like to do, you've had really two storied careers. One with the BUCAHs and one as sort of the BUCAH whistleblower, the enemy number one. Public enemy number one of the insurance companies because of the knowledge you left with, because of your experiences, what you saw and what you knew. But let me get you to go back, if I could, a bit. When you were at Cigna, what was that experience? And that wasn't your first insurance company to work with. You might get a little back story, even back up how you then got to Cigna, but what was your experience at Cigna like? Your life at Cigna as a top executive? You were what, vice president for corporate communications? Is that?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And so you're involved in strategy. You're involved in media strategy. You're involved in all those big issues that could turn into a scandal for the company. So let's go through your epiphany and your departure, and we'll talk a little bit about your career since. You've had two great careers. So let me get you to talk to us about, before you got to Cigna, what were you doing? How'd you get there? And what was your experience at Cigna and your epiphany?
Sure. Thanks so much. Actually, I worked for two of the letters in BUCAH. I worked for Cigna, as we talked, but before that, I worked for Humana. Even before that, my first job in healthcare was for a regional hospital-based system in Knoxville. It was called the Baptist Health System of East Tennessee, which there's not even a trace of that left, unfortunately, now. But I was recruited from there to go to Humana. Humana at that time was largely known as a hospital company. And I was there helping the company to spin off those hospitals, and was there as head of communications for Humana, the managed care company, when I was recruited to Cigna. And I was at Cigna much longer. I was there for about 15 years. And you're right, I was vice president of corporate communications. I did handle what we referred to as high profile stories. Whenever a reporter would call with a story based on a Cigna health plan enrollee who was not getting the care that he or she needed, my team and I would be on the hook to try to explain that, to try to make those stories go away or never see the light of day if we possibly could. And we had a pretty good track record. I also, as you noted, handled financial communications. I worked with financial reporters in New York, but also had an orientation in Washington. I spent a lot of time in Washington working with my peers in the industry to help develop strategic plans to push back against any kind of healthcare reform, any kind of policy proposals we didn't like. And we had a pretty good track record there too, of killing any reforms that we felt threatened profits. I left after what I referred to as a crisis of conscience. I went back to Tennessee to visit family and read about something called a healthcare expedition that was being held very close to where I grew up. It was being put on by Remote Area Medical, which is a Knoxville-based charity that came into existence to try to fly doctors to very remote places on the planet. And they started getting calls from communities in this country. Now, most of their expeditions, most of their free charity clinics are in the US. I went out of curiosity. And frankly, it just broke my heart. It woke my eyes up to see the consequences of some of the work that I was doing. My job, principally, to boil it down, was to enhance shareholder value, to do whatever I could to make sure that every quarter we were helping to meet Wall Street financial expectations, whatever the cost might be. And then I was face to face with people who were victims of that, and I made a commitment that day to find some other way to earn a living. Later, the final straw was handling one of those high-profile cases involving a teenage girl in Los Angeles who needed a liver transplant. Her doctors were certain it would save her life, but Cigna said, nope, we're not going to pay for it, even though it was obviously a covered benefit. And long story short, the company finally did, because of public pressure, agree to cover the transplant. But so much time had passed that Natalie Sarkeesian passed away 5 days before Christmas in 2007. And I turned in my notice pretty soon after that. I couldn't in good conscience keep doing that. That was, by the way, as you probably most people know, she was a victim of aggressive prior authorization at Cigna. And it's something that's only gotten more pronounced, more aggressive over the years. So that's more than probably you asked for or needed, but that's kind of how I came to be in that industry and why I left it.
So when you left, you went very high profile, as I don't think you described yourself, but you were described as one of the premier whistleblowers, the industry's most significant whistleblower. You've written books on healthcare. You started organizations to support the reform of our healthcare system. But what I'd like to talk about, so our audience today is made up of advisors and brokers who are because just the nature of the industry, they've been married to the BUCAHs because that was the only option. Yeah. You're going to put them with a fully insured plan. It's going to be with one of the 5 carriers, or maybe one of the smaller regional carriers. But what they don't know, and I think would be so helpful to them, as so many of the advisors on the call, Wendell, as you know, because of what we do at Next Gen Benefits, are working to move employers away from the insurance company, even in a self-funded plan. So it's not enough to be self-funded if you have the same mechanism, the same protocols, the same culprits running your self-insured plan as you had running your fully insured plan. I had a call with a 3,000 person group the other day, and they had called me because they heard me speak at a conference. And I had said, for most employers, self-funding, it doesn't meet its promise, doesn't fulfill the expectations that you're going to save money. And it's because you've got the same people running the asylum as you had fully insured. And that was their case, as a matter of fact, and they had not seen any improvement in 2 years. So our advisors are looking to disintermediate the insurance company, but that is a tough task because the employer has been seeing the millions and millions and millions of dollars of Blue Cross ads on television. touting the best health care available is Blue Cross, as though they actually did surgery at Blue Cross, or did examinations at Blue Cross, or Cigna, or whoever the carrier is. They have a big marketing budget, and that budget has done them well, as you know.
Yeah.
So what I want them to hear are some of the more egregious practices and attitudes, mindsets that you saw, and nothing has changed. I'm pretty confident, because the same, and you mentioned it, and by the way, we can't even blame the carriers for this. Their job is to increase shareholder value. The problem is nobody in the marketplace is keeping an eye on how they're doing it. That's and right. Calling foul when they're doing the wrong thing. So what are some of the practices and attitudes and protocols that you've seen that are some of the worst practices in the BUCA world?
I'll start with the mentality, the way decisions are really made and where they're made. And there are just a very small number of executives who really call the shots, and they are beholden to Wall Street, frankly. There are 7 for-profit health insurance companies that dominate the industry, I think, as most of us know. And I work for 2 of those. The pressure is constant to maximize shareholder value, and it's relentless every 3 months because of the requirement of public companies to report earnings every 3 months. There is intense pressure on the top executives, and then of course it filters down the ranks to make sure that the company does whatever it can do to make sure that you are meeting Wall Street's financial expectations, and not just investors' expectations, but the expectations of a small handful of Wall Street financial analysts who work at big banks. They are inordinately influential, and as you probably know, there is a consensus estimate of how much the companies will make each quarter on a per share basis. You do not want to miss that estimate. So these companies will do whatever it takes. You do not want to even miss that earnings expectation by a penny. If you do, you can see that there'll be a sell-off of your stock. And if you're the CEO, the CFO, or any top executive, that means that your net worth is going to be going down. The compensation of the top executives is tied to the performance of the stock, quite frankly. Their compensation is what we refer to as at risk. It's not unusual for the CEO to be paid 90% in that way. In other words, the paycheck, the compensation at a salary level is relatively low. It's high, but the vast majority of the compensation comes in the form of stock options and stock grants. So that's one thing to know. They are completely tied and motivated to meet Wall Street's quarterly financial expectations. And there are a lot of good people who work for these companies, no doubt about it, and do a lot of good work. But at the lower levels, they just have no influence. They are not able to change things appreciably. I had the idea that maybe there could be some possibility of my changing some things from the inside, but that's not, frankly, a possibility. The companies stick together pretty much when it comes to strategy. We saw that over many times when there was a shift from indemnity plans that were prevalent many years ago to managed care plans. What replaced those were high deductible plans that have led to such a huge problem. Another crisis in this country is the crisis of the functionally uninsured, and it's one of the things I write a lot about. But that's one thing I wanted to just mention. That is where the allegiance is. It's to Wall Street and to investors. Now, the way that they meet Wall Street's financial expectations are multiple, but you can kind of boil them down to 2 or 3 things. One is, as we've seen, is shifting more and more of the cost of care from insurers, from even when we're talking about self-insured plans, to employees or to the individuals and families, to the point that we have a situation in which Many people have to pay thousands of dollars out of their own pockets every year. We all know that resets every year, and many people just don't have that kind of money. But that is working extremely well for the BUCAHs, because they're avoiding paying millions of claims that they used to cover. And people are dying prematurely. They're going bankrupt. They're turning to GoFundMe if they're in one of these plans in many cases. Another is inadequate networks. You often do not have centers of excellence in many of these provider networks for some of these companies. And so that's an issue. And prior authorization, which we touched on earlier, is another way that these companies are avoiding paying for care that people need. I refer to all of these things as the barriers that these companies have put in place. They've been in place for some time, but every year they seem to get higher and higher, resulting in more and more people not being able to get the care that they need. And this is true in fully insured plans, but certainly in self-insured plans as well too. And self-insured plans, by the way, were absolutely the major source of revenue, certainly at Cigna, not so much at Humana, but at Cigna and some of the other very big BUCA companies. The vast majority of the business was in the self-insured space. Humana is saying it's getting out of that space, understandable, because it just simply has not grown in recent years. And the reason it hasn't grown, and I think probably those on the who are here today would understand that, insurance companies of BUCAHs have not been able to control healthcare costs. That's not their priority. In fact, as costs go up, as hospital costs go up, as pharma costs go up or prices go up, they, because of the perception that there's no alternative, are just able to jack up premiums. So we've had this horrible situation in which they have not made good on their assurance that if you shift your workers to a high deductible plan, then you'll see controlled premium growth. That has not happened. You've had premiums continue to go up, but out-of-pockets continue to go up. That clearly is not sustainable. The Pacific or Purchaser Group on Health last year had a survey of the CEOs of the largest companies in this country who said that in the next 5 to 10 years, the current situation is just not sustainable. And they've called on, or they've said that government officials need to do something. They're not of one mind about what that something should be. But Nelson, that's kind of what I've seen, what I've observed, and what has been happening. I keep close tabs on these companies. I run an analysis of their earnings, looking at where the money is coming from, how profitable they are. Those 7 companies, by the way, last year, 2022, about $1.25 trillion flowed through those companies. A lot of them through their PBMs now, but increasingly from public programs as well too. They converted that, or there was those companies made $69 billion in profits. But what do they do with that money? Not giving people relief from premiums or out of pockets. Increasingly, they're buying back shares of their own stock, which, going back to what I said before, when you're paid at risk, that means that your compensation is connected to that. It's really a perverse incentive for these companies to be in this kind of business and to try to provide access to care for millions of people in this country.
Well, one thing around the whole idea of the pre-authorization is you have we just heard a story from one of the advisors in our mastery track, Next Gen Mastery Track program. His cousin went to work for a BUCA that starts with H. And she was in claims or a appeal review. So when the prior authorization is refused, was turned down, declined, a lot of providers will appeal that decision. That actually happened to my son when he was diagnosed with low human growth hormone. And our endocrinologist said, we need to give him our human growth hormone. Don't worry. I said, yes, isn't that expensive? Yes, but we'll get it covered. It was Blue Cross. We were with Blue Cross at the time. And it was refused. And she did appeal, and we did get approval on appeal. But this cousin of one of our mastery track advisors, she got there and said, so your job is to help review the appeals. The first review is to throw it in the trash. Hmm. It doesn't even get considered. Basically, we said, why are we haven't looked at those yet? No, let's see who's really serious about it. Yeah. Because the number of second appeals drops dramatically from the initial appeal. They give up. Yeah. And this is anecdotal, right? We can't go to court on it. But this was her story. She said, I was shocked, absolutely shocked. So prior auth has an appeal process, but sometimes I'm not sure how I think the deck is against you on even on appeal. All right, so let me get you to talk about the mindset, and I think this is important because there was a recent Supreme Court U.S. Appeals Court decision out of the First District. You probably saw this. It was the labor union trust fund that runs a health plan suing Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. It was on appeal. The labor union had lost the first round. The district court ruled in favor of Blue Cross on the basis that no, Blue Cross is not functioning as a fiduciary, and that they were being accused of violating their fiduciary responsibilities. The court said, the appeals court said, Blue Cross and its amici, the other parties that were filing briefs on behalf of Blue Cross, were persuasive in their argument that being held to a fiduciary standard on the facts in this case would damage Blue Cross's business model. In other words, being asked to act in the best interest of the health plan was contrary to the business model of Blue Cross. Hmm. So too many employers believe that they are delegating their fiduciary responsibilities under ERISA to the insurance company. Yeah. In your view, how rational a decision is that? In your experience?
Not rational. It's not rational, and it points out that the healthcare is very different from, it should be, I think, treated very differently from other sectors of the economy. When you have a situation like that, you can say, and I've heard this many times, well, these companies need to make a profit. They're businesses, so you've got to expect that they're going to do what they can do and need to do to make a profit. Well, look at what it is that they're doing. It just makes no sense whatsoever that this is the prevailing business model. And what the consequences are to employers. I think employers have not been paying nearly enough attention, and I think that is because of a lot of factors. Healthcare is very complex. It's not core to any company's business for the most part. Brokers, as you noted earlier, have been connected to these big companies for their livelihood. So they've not been getting the straight story from agents and brokers historically. So it just points out this model, this prevailing model, makes no sense. It's not in the best interest of employers and the people who work for them. That conceivably could begin to change because of the CAA, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which does spell out more specifically that these companies have a fiduciary responsibility, or at least the plan sponsors do. And that would also obviously include insurance companies for their fully insured book of business.
After I read the very recent, just late April, decision by the First Circuit Court of Appeals, in this case involving Blue Cross of Massachusetts, I did some research on lawsuits by employers charging a violation of fiduciary responsibility to the insurance company. And I found 15, I think it was 15. In every instance, the insurance company said, whoa, we're not a fiduciary. We're not the plan administrator, which was inarguably true because the ASA, the Administrative Services Agreement that the employer generally writes up, says we, the employer, our benefit committee or the company is the plan administrator, and that's the fiduciary under ERISA. So all of the insurance company goes, well, we're not the fiduciary, we're not the plan administrator. And in every instance, the court agreed with the carrier. No, you're not. You can't be held responsible because you aren't responsible. And yet employers continue to put their faith in your former employers and their ilk.
Yeah.
Not just their faith, their finances,
Yeah.
their employees' finances. Because as you know, once they commit to providing healthcare to their employees, that money is now the employee's money, which is why there's a fiduciary requirement.
Yeah.
So is there anything that can be done? Yes, the answer is yes. Would anything be done on the inside? I think you kind of touched on this earlier when you said, I thought maybe I could make some changes from the inside. Is that really feasible?
No,
at all?
it is not. I don't think it's any more feasible now than it was when I was there. In fact, probably even less so, because these companies are considerably bigger than they were when I left, because of the various mergers and acquisitions that have taken place since then. The motivation hasn't changed. It is absolutely tied to Wall Street's financial expectations. These companies know that they have to do what they're doing to meet those expectations. I've often said that there, maybe we can talk about this, you might even disagree with this, but there basically are two ways to control healthcare cost in the prevailing system. One is to do something to bring down the unit cost of goods and services, and the other is to do something about the utilization of goods and services. And that is what the BUCAHs have done. That has been their focus. It has been to see what can be done to reduce utilization of care. And these things that I've mentioned, these barriers, are the ways that they have done that they go about doing that. So I don't think it's going to be changing. Now, you will hear the companies, in fact, United and maybe Cigna, two or three of them have said in recent weeks, because now finally there is more scrutiny of these companies than we've seen in some years, they're saying that they're going to be reducing their use of prior authorization for a whole slew of different procedures. I don't buy it. I think it's smoke and mirrors. I think it's PR. I think you'll see that they may do that, and they'll point to a few places where they're doing this. But there are other places where they're going to be ratcheting it up, and we're seeing that already, that they're doing that. The other thing that the reason I don't think you can take them at good faith is, even if they do that, what they're going to be doing is shifting to claim denials after care has been provided, and we're seeing that increasingly as well too. I work with a lot of reporters, investigative reporters, including reporters at ProPublica, which have been doing, and they're still working, they're still developing pieces that we will see in the future that's based on their investigative reporting. But one that came out a couple of weeks ago showed that Cigna, where I used to work, is using AI to automatically reject millions and millions of claims, similar to what you said. The first claims or the first requests go into the trash. It's very comparable. So what we're seeing, I think, is maybe they might be lessening up a little bit on some procedures for prior authorization, but ratcheting up their claim denials on the back end, putting more of the burden on providers and patients financially.
Well, you know, it's a bit of a game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah, it is.
So I've got multiple levers to pull. Oh, I've got to push these levers back up. Okay. I'll just pull these levers down. Different levers, same result. So what's interesting to me is that it seems like the insurance companies, because they do want to increase their earnings, look at utilization, but they apparently tend to look at it fairly, or they approach it with a meat axe and not a scalpel.
Yeah.
That it tends to be more wholesale than retail.
Yeah.
At the same time, we know in Next Gen Benefits that the only way to reduce the cost of healthcare is to reduce the frequency and severity of claims. Frequency being the number, how many claims does an employer have in his population, and how expensive are they? The cost, the severity of the claim. But in our case, we're using second opinions to weed out misdiagnoses, which are common. So there is a place for prior authorization if it's used
Absolutely.
properly.
Absolutely.
But the insurance companies don't use second opinions.
Yeah.
They'll pay for them, they say, but they don't mandate them. And a lot of our plans are mandating second opinions because we know that misdiagnosis is rife in this industry. It might not be, maybe the diagnosis is correct, but the prescription, the treatment is wrong. Mayo Clinic did a wonderful study that you're probably familiar with. They get mostly second opinions. That's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, what are we finding in those second opinions? What they found was startling. Of all of the opinions they saw during the period of this study, they found 100% correct. They didn't change a thing, 12%. 12% of the diagnoses that they saw, they upheld 12% of them as totally correct. Those that they said, absolutely wrong. You don't have cancer, or you don't have that kind of cancer, therefore the treatment protocol is incorrect, or you don't need to get your chest cracked. You need to go back and get on a statin. 21%, totally incorrect original diagnosis. So I think there is definitely a place for second opinions, which is where I think pre-cert should come in. It's like, let's go find another physician to take a look at this. But the other is the cost. And that's where Blue Cross and Aetna and Cigna seem to have no interest. They let the hospitals charge whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
They just take a discount off an artificially inflated charge master. The insurance company doesn't even ask what it is. We don't care what it is. We just want our 60%. Right. And overall, we only want to pay you this much money.
Yeah.
And so the insurance company lets the hospital charge what they want.
Yeah.
And much the same with the drug companies.
It is. Yeah.
And so I wonder, what we're doing is using the employer's checkbook to control the cost of healthcare. We're saying, no, we're not going to pay for that. So reference-based pricing. No, Mr. Hospital Executive, we're not going to pay 6 times Medicare. We'll pay 1.8 times Medicare. It's an 80% profit. Can you live with that? Hospital says no. They'll usually take it. Right? So it's fascinating to me that the insurance companies haven't glommed onto some of the strategies. I know they know what we're doing. These are some of the smartest. Would you not attest? These are some of the brightest, most accomplished people in the country, in the business community, work for these insurance companies. These are not dumb people.
Yeah.
But they seem to be so stuck in their model. And I guess it's because you're like the only person who's really been calling BS on their BS.
Yeah.
Over the years. And the beauty of you is you had that credibility, because they can say about Marshall Allen, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just a journalist. He's not privy to what goes on inside our corporate offices. You lived in those corporate offices.
I did. Yeah.
So you had and have that credibility about it. But I'm surprised that there are ways that they could control cost without, I think, affecting their share value. And they don't seem to be interested in that.
They're not. And I think the reason is because it would take some investment to make some change. The status quo is working quite well for them right now, and they don't perceive any meaningful threats. They're always looking to see what threats there might be, both in the marketplace and in the political arena. And they're pretty cocky. They're pretty certain that the status quo is going to continue on, that they can pretty much control change. And I think that's why, as you all get more traction and take some business away from them, they will ultimately more business away from them. I'm sure you already are, but they'll begin to take notice. But I think right now they see some things that are happening in the marketplace and in Washington state capitals as kind of gnats that are circulating, and they're not terribly worried about them. You're mentioning that suit in Massachusetts. I, for much of my time at Cigna, was part of legal and public affairs, and I reported to the general counsel for quite a long time. And I know, working with the lawyers, there is a huge number of lawyers on staff, but an order of magnitude far beyond that of lawyers that are on retainer. Many of the biggest law firms in the world are on retainer for these companies. So it's very hard to mount a legal challenge against the way these companies do business because of their vast resources and how many lawyers they have. But it's similar in other ways too. Marketing and PR, hiring lobbyists. I mean, they spend huge sums of money to protect that status quo rather than seeing what could be done differently. It's just the way they roll.
You mentioned large, that these are large organizations with lots of resources. I saw something the other day that sort of surprised me. The automotive industry in this country is a huge industry. It's one of the largest manufacturing sectors in the country. $1 billion company. United Healthcare is a $500 million company, 10 times the size of General Motors.
Yeah,
that brings with it a lot of clout, political, financial. I mean, their resources are largely unlimited, and politicians. So quick, I don't know if I told you this, but an acquaintance of mine was meeting with Paul Ryan. When Paul Ryan was the Speaker of the House, a congressman from Wisconsin. And this was actually, I believe, one of his constituents, but he was a CEO, very savvy CEO. He said, Paul, you know that the ACA, for better or worse, was not healthcare reform. It was insurance reform. Paul Ryan said, yes, John, I know that. John Turinas leaned in and said, Paul, you and Congress have to address the cost of healthcare. And according to John Turinas, Paul Ryan looked at him and said, John, Congress will never, ever, ever address the cost of healthcare. And it's because of the power of the healthcare lobby.
Yeah.
So that's a non-starter. That's not going anywhere. But let me ask a question. By the way, we've got a number of questions piling up. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A right now, because we're going to take some time to have one question. Is for Wendell only. And I know why he says that. What is your opinion, Wendell, of Medicare for All?
Well, you know, and I'll confession here. I just was in Washington this week. I was invited to be a part of the reintroduction of the Medicare for All bills. Bernie Sanders reintroduced his bill in the Senate. Pramila Jayapal is a lead sponsor in the House. What I have said is that Medicare for All would be a better system than what we have now. And I firmly believe that because of what we've been talking about right now. The incentives are just not aligned to be able to give employers and patients a break. It's going to continue to be this broken system driven by greed and the need to meet Wall Street's financial expectations. I do not think that we will see Medicare for All anytime in the near future. It's just not in the cards. clearly not during this congressional session when you have the divided government on Capitol Hill. President Biden has said he would not sign a Medicare for All bill. There is a lot of enthusiasm for it. A majority of the Democrats in the House have signed on to Congresswoman Jayapal's bill. But I don't think there is anyone's expectations that legislation will be enacted, certainly not during this session of Congress, and probably not in my lifetime. I do say that unless folks in your orbit can really begin to make a difference, it will eventually get more traction, and there will be more of a belief that Medicare for All is inevitable. Now, I will say this: this year, we learned this from the Kaiser Family Foundation, I think just a few weeks ago. No surprise that a majority of Americans who are Medicare eligible are now enrolled in a Medicare Advantage plan. What I think that could happen, and I hope that this doesn't, but we're heading in that path, that these big companies, largely BUCA companies, will control the Medicare program. And they will say, yeah, we're all for Medicare for All, because they will then they're on their way to owning it. So that is a huge, huge concern. And I spend a lot of my time not so much advocating for Medicare for All, but to help policymakers in Washington in particular understand what's happening with their public programs, in addition to what's happening in the commercial space.
So I believe it was the same anonymous attendee, as they are labeled here in the questions. It says, "Okay, Nelson, what do you think about Medicare for All?" All I'll say about Medicare for All is I don't think it's financially sustainable. We're running out of Medicare money, or the government's running out. The trust fund is getting very, very low for our Social Security. Medicare is, I just don't think the numbers work from a Medicare for All perspective. But here's the bigger problem I see. Medicare for All right now, Medicare is a payment system. It doesn't run healthcare, it doesn't run the healthcare system, it controls it because of the funding. You pay, who pays the piper calls the tune. But here's the problem. If we go to Medicare for All, there's no more commercial market for hospitals to abuse to make up for the fact that they are poorly run organizations, in most cases, hospitals, even gouging employers at 40, 60, 80, 800% of Medicare. They're still barely in the black if they are in the black. So you take that commercial cash cow away, and every hospital has to rely on Medicare reimbursements, they're going to raise their hand and say, we can't do it. And Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others will say, yeah, we knew this was not a good idea. We'll take it from here. And they'll nationalize the hospitals, and they'll nationalize the doctors, as they've done in Great Britain and a lot of other countries that are single payer. And so now you do have a government run health system. And I don't know of anything the government runs very well. And I certainly don't want the same people who run the VA to be running my health system. So that's where I come in. That's where I come down on Medicare for All. As a funding mechanism, it seems to make a little bit of sense. But I don't think it's sustainable long term. There are a couple of other questions. So what is your solution to Medicare for All, so we can get the cost down to lower reimbursement levels and get specialty pharmacy out of healthcare? Any thoughts on that question?
Well,
big question. Like
I said, Medicare for All, that's just not going to happen in the near future. You and I would disagree on some of the things that you said. I would say that I agree with those CEOs that were surveyed by Purchase a Business Group on Health. The current system, as we know it, is not sustainable either. The Medicare Trust Fund is shrinking, and to a large extent because the policymakers have enabled these big BUCA companies to raid the trust fund through the Medicare Advantage plans. Now, I know that there are a lot of benefits for some people for Medicare Advantage plans, but what you're seeing is these companies having rigged the system, the coding system in particular, but also just being paid bonuses in years past to participate in the program. That was by design to get more of these companies into that program. Specialty pharmacies, there clearly has been a lot of focus on Capitol Hill on pharma over the past several years. You're seeing the first, I think the legislation that was passed that enables Medicare to begin to negotiating some medications, I think starting with 10, is a start. It's something that pharma fought tooth and toenail, but it's going to happen, it looks like, although there are going to be some legal challenges. We may or may not see that. I think that you will continue to see the cost of some specialty drugs continue to go up. The pharmaceutical companies spend even more than BUCA does to protect its financial interest. Now, all that said, most people, their medications are generics. The vast majority of them are. They can get a lot of their medications pretty cost effectively, actually outside of their Part D plans, which I have found. So it's a mess out there.
There's an additional question. Don't you think the quality of care would suffer under Medicare for all? One other aspect that I alluded to but didn't quite hit on is physicians. We had 120,000 physicians quit the industry. Some were going to retire anyway, but 120,000 doctors, when we have a doctor shortage to begin with, is alarming. And I know a lot of doctors, and in my position, I get to talk to a lot of doctors, and they're telling me, I'm out. I can't make the money I used to make to do the work I'm asked to do, or instead of literally operating at their highest level of expertise. For instance, I know can't think of the specialty. It's very, very, very specialized. It does inner ear, blastomas, things like that. He's no longer operating on the inner ear. He's doing back and neck surgeries because it pays just about as much, and it's a lot easier and a lot less risk to do for the money they're being paid. And so I also think that's going to chase a lot of the best physicians, especially surgeons and specialists, out of the business, because it's just not worth their while anymore. Now you can say they're greedy, or it doesn't really matter why they're doing it. If they're out, and we don't have access to their expertise. There's a question, and it warms the cockles of my heart. Adam Sheldon, I'll give you a shout out here. He says, wait, what? Wendell thinks single payer Soviet Medicare for all is better than the free marketplace we have now. I'm going to defend Wendell, not that he needs my defense, but we don't have a free marketplace in healthcare. That's what NextGen is working to do. There's no supply chain management. There is no executive oversight of the healthcare providers or the insurance companies, which are the in-between, the go-between. We've delegated responsibility to a party that's not responsible, the insurance company. So we don't have the supply and demand. We don't have the market forces that you have in a free market system. Right. And you don't have so remember when Domino's had to redo its whole approach, and they came out with those ads where they said our pizza sucked and we promised to do better and we're going to give you better. They did that because people stopped buying Domino's pizzas. For no other reason, but there's no pressure like that on the insurance companies to control the cost of healthcare, to ensure the quality of healthcare. The BUCA networks, every doctor is a great doctor. How do we know? They're in our network. The insurance company knows who the good doctors are and the bad doctors are. They don't share that with you because they have a contract with the providers that prevents them from steering away from a bad doctor or to a great doctor. So obviously the insurance companies, inarguable, the insurance companies' primary commitment and loyalty is to protecting their providers from their own bad outcome scores instead of protecting their members from the bad doctors and dangerous hospitals. So there isn't a free market. That's what we're working to restore. And someone says, Brian Cheddar, hey, Brian, out in Arizona, says hospitals would go broke without private insurance, which was the point that I was making. There's a question from my friend Rand Wall, who says, what size employers are you referring to? And I'm not sure who that question is for. Rand, if you want to give us a little more detail, we'll be happy to answer that. Blue Cross is a mutual company here in Texas. Does that give policyholders any power? Well, it does if they would organize, but policyholders. I was thinking about shareholders. Does that give policyholders any power? Wendell, I'm going to defer to you on that question.
So ask the question again. I'm not sure I heard the full.
Blue Cross in Texas is a mutual company. Does that give the policyholders any power?
I don't think so. I don't think really significantly more than they would. You've got, what the company called Elevance that previously was called Anthem, that previously was called WellPoint, owns about 15 of the big Blue Cross plans around the country. There are some that are mutual. There's some that operate just strictly still on pretty much they would allege a nonprofit basis. I think a better term is tax exempt basis. I don't think so. There's not a significant difference. I don't think necessarily either from legal exposure. All the so-called nonprofits in the health insurance space operate pretty much like the big for-profits do because they've become dominant. They set the rules, and any player in the space has to follow those rules pretty much. Otherwise, you wind up with adverse selection. So you've got that, they got that problem. Two things I want to mention. You mentioned doctors. There are a lot of doctors that support Medicare for all. I talked to a lot of them. A lot of doctors are burned out and leaving the profession because of the burden of prior authorization. A lot of things we're talking about here. They're not able to treat their patients the way they know they should be treated. So there's increasingly the use of the term moral injury when we're talking to doctors. By no means are we seeing a majority of doctors marching down the streets for Medicare for all, but there are a lot who support that. Now, we have a crisis in primary care. Another problem is that BUCA is buying up physician practices. So you need to know that. One of my biggest concerns about maybe some of the thoughts behind some of the questions is there is this fear that Medicare for all is going to be enacted. And we spend a lot of mind space on that when you better be talking about and thinking about the continued growth of the BUCA companies. Because with the vertical integration, you noted earlier how big United Health Care is. It is now the 5th largest company on the Fortune 500. CVS is number 4. So this is the way the world is going. That's what you need to focus on. I'm going to tell you once again, Medicare for all is not going to pass now. It's not going to pass in the near future. It ultimately might, unless you guys can really begin to focus on providing employers with a true alternative to the prevailing model that we have with the BUCA companies.
So another question, what is a multi-pronged approach that could gain traction in your opinion? And you've mentioned what we're doing, and I appreciate that. And we're working, of course, to gain that traction, but we got strong headwinds. What other thoughts do you have? Are there any other remedies or interventions?
I don't think there necessarily are interventions that there can be some among policymakers. There can be some policy remedies that can get, and we're seeing the beginning of some of that on Capitol Hill. There's a lot of scrutiny now on PBMs. and I think for good reason. And I've, over the past several weeks, have met with Republicans and Democrats on PBMs in particular. And as you probably all know, CVS, which owns Aetna, Cigna, which owns Express Scripts, and United, which owns Optum RX, control 80% of the PBM market. So there is some focus, there's a lot of focus on that on Capitol Hill, both sides of Capitol Hill and both parties. You're seeing a lot of attention being focused too on Medicare Advantage. Lawmakers are beginning to wake up to realize the Medicare trust fund has been raided by big BUCA companies. So there is that. But I don't think you can expect a lot, and I'm hopeful that they'll begin to do something, as I said at the top of our conversation, about out-of-pocket costs for people across the board. You've got to do that. What I do with my newsletter, which is called Healthcare Uncovered, is to try to help people understand what these big companies are like these days, how they've grown, how they've changed. And I've got folks in Washington who make sure that policymakers see that. You've got to make sure they are informed and understand how the healthcare system really works. You might be surprised, or you might not be, that their understanding of our healthcare system is very, very shallow. So I spend a lot of my time writing and in personal conversations with lawmakers and staff to help them understand this is what the world is like right now. We've got to figure out what we can do, what can be done in the so-called free market. And I think there's a lot that can be done. I'm excited with what you all are doing, but you need to have greater awareness. That's one of the things I'm going to be shifting to as well, is to help employers and policymakers and the media understand the good things that you all are doing, the alternatives to the BUCA plans. And you've got a lot of good stories to tell. That's going to be essential. You've got to have some resources to tell your story. As you said, Nelson, at the beginning of the conversation, these companies spend so much money, so much of our money on marketing and sales. They've got a huge advantage. So you've got to figure out how to be very smart with the resources you do have to make sure that employers see you as viable alternatives. And that's not easy, but I'm certainly willing and more than willing to be there in your corner to try to help employers understand what you all do, the benefits you can bring to them, but also how they're being taken to the cleaners by the BUCA companies.
Well, because employers look at it as a non-choice, we're with the BUCAHs, we have to be with the BUCAHs, for them to understand from you what their current dancing partner is really like, gives us an opening, which is really all we need. We need a hearing. And so many employers are deaf to our value prop because they still have confidence. I totally don't understand why, but they have confidence in the insurance companies. So Wendell, I want to just let everyone know, you are, I would say, a largely unsung hero in all of this. And you left Cigna, you went public at your own personal, not just risk, but you walked away from a very, very cushy lifestyle, a big salary, corporate jets, 4-star hotels, Michelin dinners. So you paid a lot for your honesty in this. So thank you for that. Tell everyone how they can follow you. You're on Substack, I think, but how else can they get hooked up with Wendell Potter?
Thanks so much. Yeah, follow me on Twitter if you do Twitter. It's at Wendell Potter. I've got quite a few followers there. My Substack is called Healthcare Uncovered. Check that out. You can get there by wendellpotter.substack.com. Take a look at what we're trying to do. And as I said, we're going to be transitioning, or at least adding the element of trying to explain your all's world, what you're doing, the benefits you bring to the marketplace. I lead a coalition called Lower Out of Pockets Now. Check out loopcoalition.org. And I think those are the main ways to follow my work. But also, Nelson, if you have any questions from others after this, or people want to talk with me, please feel free to connect them to me.
I will do that. Wendell, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your experience here in the Healthcare Lounge. We will be back next month with a very, very hands-on, actionable program on direct contracting and how you can replace the horrible BUCA network contracts that are totally detrimental to your clients with direct contracts between the real payer, the employer, your client, and the providers. So be sure to tune in next month here on the Healthcare Lounge. We'll see you then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.